The Secret Art of Surrender. How hostage negotiators control minds. Why strategic surrender is the most powerful weapon of elite negotiators. In 1985, hijacker Seif al-Din Mohammed Hamadei controlled TWA Flight 847 for 17 days, holding 153 passengers hostage. The U.S. had military bases across the Mediterranean, fighter jets, and special forces. Yet who really controlled the situation? The man with the simple pistol. Hamadei transformed his apparent defeat into absolute power, forcing the world's strongest nation to negotiate on his terms. This embodies Law 22 of power. Use the surrender tactic. When you surrender, you buy time to recover your strength and leave your opponent confused about your true intentions. Surrender isn't weakness, it's an ancient strategy of psychological control. Hostage negotiators know this intimate secret of power. Whoever surrenders controls the pace. They've learned that direct resistance is strategic suicide. Instead, they surrender to conquer. They yield ground to gain mental territory. They lower their weapons to disarm their adversary. The armed criminal expects confrontation, violence, resistance. When he encounters acceptance, understanding, and apparent submission, his mental framework crumbles. He no longer knows who's the predator and who's the prey. The negotiator who surrenders actually assumes total control of the dynamic. Think of it this way: when you stop pushing a door that's being pushed against you, the person on the other side loses balance and falls forward. The physics of power works the same. Your resistance feeds their resistance. Your surrender creates a power vacuum that you can strategically fill. Captain Harvey Schlossberg, pioneer of modern hostage negotiation, revealed in his classified reports how he used this tactic. He would surrender to the emotional demands of hijackers, agree with their frustrations, validate their complaints, not to be submissive, but to create psychological connection. Once that mental bridge was established, he subtly guided the conversation where he wanted it. Strategic surrender is like mental jujitsu. You use your opponent's strength against themselves. When someone comes with total aggression, expecting a fight, your acceptance completely disorients them. They lose reference of where the enemy is, because you're no longer playing the role they expected. This principle works in corporate meetings, family discussions, business negotiations. When you stop desperately defending your position and start agreeing strategically, the other person lowers their guard. In that moment of vulnerability, you plant your ideas like seeds that will germinate later. True surrender is recognizing that sometimes you need to take 3 steps back to advance 10. It's accepting a small, temporary defeat to build a large, permanent victory. The weak resist until death. The powerful bend when necessary and rise stronger. Practical action 1. Identify a current situation where you're directly resisting someone. Stop pushing. Apparently accept the person's position. Observe how this disarms their aggressiveness and opens space for you to subtly influence the situation. True strength doesn't come from steel's hardness, but from water's flexibility that goes around obstacles and erodes mountains. Negotiators know, who adapts, survives. Who surrenders strategically, dominates. If you understand the hidden power of surrender, type control in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to discover more power secrets that elites don't want you to know. How the psychology of apparent submission disarms any adversary. Detective Joseph McNeil faced over 150 hostage situations during his career with Chicago PD. In one of these situations, an armed man held his ex-wife and children hostage in a downtown apartment. McNeil did something that shocked even his colleagues. He completely disarmed himself and entered the apartment with his hands raised. The kidnapper expected to be treated as an enemy. Instead, he found someone who apparently put himself in an even more vulnerable position. This psychological inversion created such deep mental confusion that the man instinctively lowered his weapon. McNeil had hacked the aggressor's primitive brain. There's an ancestral programming in our nervous system. When someone submits, our aggressiveness automatically decreases. It's a species survival mechanism. Predators stop attacking when prey stops resisting. This is the biology of power working in your favor. Apparent submission activates the reward system in the opponent's brain. They feel victorious, powerful in control. This sensation of dominance releases dopamine and lowers cortisol levels, the stress hormone. Result: they become less vigilant, less aggressive, more receptive to subtle influence. Masters of manipulation have always known this. They feign weakness to inspire arrogance in their adversary. They play victim so the opponent lowers psychological defenses. They show false vulnerability to awaken others' protective instinct. It's pure theater, but theater that works. Think about everyday situations where you've seen this work. The employee who exaggeratedly agrees with the irritated boss, only to later subtly suggest a different solution. The wife who accepts her husband's decision, but plants strategic doubts that make him voluntarily change his mind. The salesperson who agrees the product is expensive, creating an environment to show real value. The key lies in emotional synchronization. You need to mirror the person's emotional state initially, then gradually lead them where you want. If they're furious, you acknowledge that fury without resisting. If they're anxious, you validate that anxiety. Resistance generates more resistance. Acceptance generates openness. This technique is especially powerful with narcissistic and controlling people. They have a pathological need to dominate, to be right, to be recognized as superior. When you temporarily feed that ego, they become psychologically dependent on your validation. Then you have real power over them. The secret lies in timing. You submit at the right time, for the right duration, with the right intensity. Too much, you become a doormat. Too little, you don't disarm the adversary. It's a subtle dance that requires practice and constant observation of others' reactions. Agent Clara Martinez, specialist in domestic hostage situations, perfected this technique with violent husbands. She would validate their feelings of being misunderstood and unappreciated, making them feel heard for the first time in years. Once their emotional guard was down, she could guide them toward peaceful resolution. Practical action 2. Choose someone who's usually aggressive or domineering with you. In the next interaction, initially agree with at least 3 points that person raises. Observe how their tone changes and how this opens space for you to insert your ideas subtly. Power isn't about being the strongest in the room. It's about being the smartest. And intelligence sometimes means appearing weak when you're strong, appearing lost when you know exactly where you're going. If you recognize the power of reverse psychology, type intelligence in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to master more mental tactics that transform apparent weakness into real power. What if strategic silence was your secret negotiation weapon? Agent Diana Rodriguez, former FBI lead negotiator, revealed a disturbing technique from her most tense operations. During a bank robbery in Phoenix, she stayed completely silent for 42 seconds after the robber made an impossible demand. It wasn't hesitation. It was pure psychological warfare. Silence is the most sophisticated form of strategic surrender. You don't agree, don't disagree, don't react. You simply exist. And that passive existence creates a mental vacuum that the other person feels compelled to fill. The robber started talking nervously, revealing critical information that led to his peaceful capture. Our society has a terror of silence. We live in constant mental noise, always filling empty spaces with unnecessary words. When you break this pattern and embrace strategic emptiness, you become an invisible and disturbing force. People start projecting their fears and insecurities into this space you've created. Silence is power because it forces the other person to reveal their cards first. In any negotiation, whoever speaks first after a proposal is at a disadvantage. Whoever endures the tension of silence controls the conversation's rhythm. It's like a staring contest. Whoever looks away first loses psychological position. Rodriguez learned this by observing experienced criminals. They used long pauses and uncomfortable silences to break negotiators' mental resistance. But she turned the game against them, transforming silence into a surgical precision weapon. There's science behind this. The human brain interprets prolonged silence as rejection or disapproval. This activates our primitive need for social acceptance, creating anxiety that forces us to speak to relieve the tension. Whoever controls this dynamic controls the entire interaction. Strategic silence isn't dumb muteness. It's a conscious choice not to waste verbal ammunition. Every word you don't speak keeps your options open. Every pause you sustain forces the opponent to show their real intentions. It's power economy applied to communication. Practice this in everyday conversations. When someone asks a provocative question, take a deep breath and count to 5 before responding. Watch how the person gets restless, how they start reformulating the question or giving unnecessary explanations. Their discomfort is territory conquered by you. Silence also works as a power test. Insecure people fill silences compulsively. Powerful people feel comfortable in emptiness. When you demonstrate that you can exist in silence without anxiety, you signal psychological strength that subconsciously intimidates. In important meetings, use dramatic pauses before giving critical answers. In family discussions, let silence do the heavy lifting of reflection. In business negotiations, let your offer hang in the air without desperate justifications. Silence sells better than 1,000 arguments. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Thompson used this technique during military interrogations. She would ask a question and then wait. The silence became so unbearable that suspects would start confessing things she hadn't even asked about. The void demanded to be filled, and they filled it with their secrets. Remember, whoever feels obligated to break the silence is revealing need. Whoever sustains silence demonstrates sufficiency. This is the difference between those who beg for attention and those who deserve respect. Practical action 3. In the next 3 important conversations, implement 5-second pauses before answering direct questions. Count mentally and observe how this changes the interaction's dynamic and people's reactions. Silence is the language of the powerful, while the weak shout to be heard, the strong whisper, and the world leans in to listen. If you understand the power of strategic silence, type strength in the comments. Like this video and subscribe to the channel to learn more techniques that transform you into a magnetic and irresistible presence. How to use calculated vulnerability to dominate any situation. Agent Rebecca Stone, veteran negotiator from Seattle, faced an impossible situation in 2001. A former Marine with severe PTSD held an entire daycare center hostage, demanding to speak only with someone who understood his pain. Stone did something revolutionary. She confessed her own war scars, shared her sleepless nights, admitted her deepest weaknesses. The kidnapper lowered his weapon and began to cry, not because Stone had shown weakness, but because she had demonstrated enough strength to be vulnerable. This is the paradoxical law of power. Sometimes you need to show your wounds to reveal your invincibility. Calculated vulnerability is the most sophisticated surrender that exists. You don't surrender to circumstances, you surrender to the other person's humanity, creating emotional connection that transcends any logical barrier. It's disarming by showing that you also bleed, but that you chose to keep fighting anyway. Powerful people have interesting scars. Weak people have wounds that won't stop bleeding. The difference lies in the narrative. You transform trauma into wisdom, pain into purpose, defeat into valuable experience. Your vulnerability becomes proof of your resilience, not your fragility. Stone knew that violent men are usually wounded men. They attack because they feel attacked by life. When you remove the mask of invincibility and show your own battles, you signal, I've also been where you are, but I found a way out. This creates hope where before there was only despair. Calculated vulnerability works because it activates the brain's mirror neuron system. When you open up genuinely, the other person feels safe to do the same. It's like creating an emotional disarmament zone where both can exist without protective masks. But beware, there's an abyssal difference between vulnerability and victimhood. Vulnerability is strength that chooses to show itself. Victimhood is weakness disguised as courage. Vulnerability inspires respect and connection. Victimhood inspires pity and distance. The technique requires perfect timing and precise reading of the moment. You can't appear desperate for connection or too manipulative in your approach. You need to be authentic enough to be credible, but strategic enough to maintain control of the situation. In business negotiations, admitting a past mistake can create credibility that no logical argument can achieve. In personal relationships, Confessing an insecurity can generate intimacy that years of superficial conversations don't produce. In family conflicts, revealing how certain attitudes hurt you can instantly disarm aggressiveness. Dr. Michael Hayes, hostage psychology specialist, studied this phenomenon for decades. He discovered that showing strategic vulnerability triggers what he called the protector response, an automatic impulse to help rather than harm. It's evolutionary psychology working in your favor. The key lies in dosage and context. You share vulnerabilities you've already overcome, not open wounds that still control you. You show scars that became wisdom, not injuries that still make you bleed. It's displaying your won battles, not your lost wars. True leaders master this art. They know when to show they're also human, that they've also faced fears, that they've also made mistakes, but always within a context of overcoming and growth. Their vulnerability becomes a bridge to connect, not an abyss to get lost in. Practical action 4. Identify a current tense situation in your life. Find a related vulnerability of yours that you've already overcome and share it strategically with the person involved, focusing on the lesson learned, not the pain suffered. True invincibility doesn't come from never falling. It comes from getting up so many times that your scars become a map for others to find strength. Whoever masters calculated vulnerability masters the human heart. If you understand the power of being strategically vulnerable, type courage in the comments. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share with someone who needs to understand that showing healed wounds is a demonstration of power, not weakness.